The Pin Drop podcast brings you the most intrepid chat on the podsphere. Interesting people sharing their personal formula for success, stories of personal growth, people confessing their fears and what they have learned from going to the edge. Hosted by me, Vicky Anstey, founder of We Are Intrepid. We Are Intrepid is a personal growth philosophy and an adventure experience company. Our sole purpose is to show you how to experience the truly life-enhancing effects of advantage through adversity, to understand how our fears and emotions work, and how to unlock the huge potential we all have to lead a more fulfilling and rewarding life. And maybe for you, that starts with listening to this.
Victoria Rush, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Finally, we've had a few near misses, haven't we?
Quite a few, yeah.
Get this organised. No, not at all. You're a busy woman, but thank you so much for finding the time. I know you're literally just about to move house, so really grateful. We first met at an event that I spoke at, that I did a sort of keynote talk at, and then we connected afterwards and have sort of stayed in touch ever since. And I didn't realize at that time quite what you had achieved and who you were and what you'd done. You heard all about my side of things, but I didn't really appreciate who you were. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to have you come on the podcast and talk about some of those things and inspire our audience here. But essentially, you're many things, right? You're an activist and a campaigner. You're also a film director, which is probably one of the main things, or the headline thing that we might talk about. You've been a rugby player. I don't think you play anymore, do you? No.
Too old and too sore. It's just like things were falling off, so I had to stop.
And I mean, you are just generally an all-round legend, game changer, philanthropist. You
make it sound so much better than it is.
You were behind the I Am Enough campaign, which I'd love to hear you talk about in a moment. We'll get onto that, which essentially was around this sort of unfair representation of women in advertising for the Ireland rugby kit. And from there, you then went on to direct the No Woman, No Try documentary, which if anyone wants to watch, if they haven't already, God forbid, is on Prime.
Go watch it. Listen to
right? Go watch it. Yeah. And so that's really, I mean, I found it fascinating. It's really about the reality of being a women's rugby player from grassroots to top tier, and all the barriers that women face unfairly in that sport. And of course, there are many other sports that have the same barriers. And I know that you are actively, trying to buck that trend in lots of different areas of life. But it's just a really honest look at the kind of challenges that women face in that game specifically. But that's just kind of one aspect of what you do and what you've done and what you stand for. And but what a fantastic platform that has been, and a huge success. And I know you just completed a sort of tour, haven't you? A promotional tour.
Yeah, that might be the best introduction I've ever had. So you've done so much more than I have, but that was all really kind of you to say. I think just going back to when we first met, I think you gave that keynote and I was like, I want to be friends with her. So I was like, hi, I've chosen you. You will be one of mine.
And I was delighted.
Yeah, I kind of collect friends like that. All my friends have said, I couldn't get rid of you until then we became friends. I was like, haha, gotcha.
Do you know what? Just as a side note, I found that, I thought it was such a fantastic event organised by our mutual friend, Sarah Butler, but like, just what a great collection of women.
Yeah,
wasn't it? And I felt the energy in the room and the solidarity, and all of you were complete strangers to me. I think many of you know each other from other networking events, but I just felt so warmly welcomed and understood, and it was just a great occasion, I felt. So
it was. Really, I think we all believe the same thing, which obviously makes it a lot easier when you're in a room full of people on the same page. But yeah, that's I guess what it all was about the film included and that very long, lovely long list you've just made up. No, everything for me has always been about that, giving us all a platform. And like you say, No Woman No Try was about rugby, but really it's not at all, actually. It's just about the challenges women face, whether it's in rugby or football or any sport, or at work in the boardroom. You know, many of my friends who don't play rugby, I don't have many of them, but the ones that don't, they get it, because it's the same problem everywhere. We're just using one particular lens to look at it. And rugby, I thought, was a great lens, because there's still, for some reason, a divide on the sport. Some people think women still shouldn't play it, so it's the kind of perfect platform to use that analogy. I don't know who any of those people are, but
well, they certainly exist on social media, don't they? If you spend any time looking at the ridiculous comments, then
exactly. And that, I guess, was what it was all about. It's always really meant a lot to me, sport and that kind of access to sport. I think I just hit a point where I'd had enough. You know what, like, everyone needs to get over this. Everyone needs to allow anyone else to do whatever they want to do. Like, this isn't an option anymore, it's a reality. So how do we kind of change that? And I tried baking in lockdown, really bad. I'm really bad at baking. Everyone else was doing that. I was like, find something else.
I'm going to make a documentary.
yeah. Honest to God, that is what happened.
Well, we have something else in common. I'm also terrible at baking and all forms of cooking.
Surprisingly terrible. I tried cookies, and they're not that hard. But I'm the kind of person that when the measurement says X amount of sugar, I was like, well, there's just a little bit left in the bag. Like, I'm not keeping that.
See, my problem is that I refuse to take instruction. So a recipe for me is like a dare to do it my way and to make it up. I'm like, don't tell me it's like, 200 grams of something. I'll decide for myself. Yeah, exactly. I don't read instruction booklets. I don't read recipes.
I do it even better. I actually take two different recipes that are in different types of measurements and try and do it from that.
Metric, imperial, just mix it all up.
I did one in American cups and another one in grams. I was trying to do them both at the same time. Slightly different recipes. And unsurprisingly, it was carnage.
But seriously, you didn't just sit in lockdown while the rest of the world were baking cookies and say, I think I'm going to make a documentary. How did that actually come about?
No, I did do that.
Oh, you did do that. I love it. I actually love it.
Yeah, I don't. When you think back and you start to have to explain like the thought process, you wonder, should I lie and make it sound like I'm a much more held together human being, or should I just say the truth and it's like I made some stupid irrational decision and it paid off really well? It goes back to the I'm Enough movement that you mentioned, and that was sort of the early first 3 months of lockdown. The brief history of it is that Canterbury launched the Irish international kit. They used the male Ireland players to advertise the male kit and the campaign. Very normal, understandable decision to make. For the women's kit, the playing kit, they actually superimposed photos of the jerseys onto female models. Not only that, the models are wearing jeans. So it's not even like the whole thing was a car crash from women don't play the sport, you're just supporters. The whole thing was a car crash from sort of start to finish. And they used COVID as an excuse to say that the shoot didn't happen, but then you could say, why didn't you superimpose the kit onto the players at least? Just for any kind of validation, and they didn't, and it was
why didn't you do the same for men that you did for women, right?
And their shoot went ahead, whatever it may be. So there were all of these things, and I just, from my perspective, I kind of looked at it and thought somebody maybe quite far down a pecking order of some description made a rash decision in the beginning of COVID, didn't really think about the consequences of it, and it blew up quite
or just didn't think it mattered enough.
And that's what I think, like, that small decision to them is because of a fundamental issue that starts at the top of the business, if you've never been taught to prioritize this, if you've never been taught that this is the right way to act and work, then how is the person that's made that decision going to know any better? So I think the problem 100% starts with the business. But I think from my perspective, it seemingly was one very small decision by one person who just got it wrong. And unfortunately, it actually fed into a much bigger problem for the business, for the sport, for the country, in terms of the way they were treating their female athletes at the time too. So that kind of all happened, and Twitter sphere.
And they did respond with some degree of responsibility, right?
So like there was this whole like Twitter storm about it. It was called out online, you know, as Twitter trolls do, came along and said female athletes or female rugby players aren't good looking enough. And I was like, if you go down to my Sunday club, the male athletes aren't that good looking either. It doesn't matter. It's not all we're hearing.
Why does it come down to that?
Why does it matter what a woman looks like to be good at a job? It doesn't. If you're good enough to play for Ireland, you're good enough to model the kit. Question answer. And it was huge. End of subject. Huge kind of Twitter explosion, as you know, as we all know, happens on these kind of subjects. And I was sort of sat kind of thinking, this can't be life still. I remember being told when I was 16 that I shouldn't be in the gym. Gyms were for boys. But you feed into that, you have to look a certain way, especially at that age. But you can only do it in a certain way that's then deemed acceptable.
And feminine, whatever that means.
Well, yeah, exactly. And all these things. And I just thought, I really, really thought we were past this. For what, maybe my head had been stuck in the sand or whatever. But if I was being told that before social media existed, how many kids are now on social media with even more pressure than we ever had, which is kind of was unbelievable to say, but it's even worse for them. Then they're being told that they can't play a sport because they're female, they shouldn't, or they can't, whatever it may be. Because if we don't create the alternative narrative to this for kids online, then there's gonna be more kids that felt the way I did, if not feel worse. And I have to, somewhere this cycle has to stop. We're like, right.
And you decided you were the woman to do it. I
rang a friend and I was like, can you just hear me out whilst I try and fumble through a thought I've had? Because I'm one of these people, I have lots of ideas. They're not all great. Some of them are really bad. Sometimes I just have to be like, no, leave that one.
They don't all turn into documentaries. Is that what we're saying?
Don't ever tell anyone you actually thought that. And my friend said, actually, do you know what? If you do it, I'll help. Send me a text explaining it and I'll send it out to loads of people. And that's kind of what happened. And I was like, oh, okay. So the campaign will be called I Am Enough. And the purpose behind that phrase for me was that it's something to say to yourself. Instead of waiting or looking for external validation, which is what social media is, which is what boys in the gym are doing, a woman or a girl can look in the mirror and say, I am enough. And you start to learn to give yourself that validation back. And you start to seek it internally, not externally. That whole thing was just about that. It's not about telling everybody else off that you deserve it. It's about telling yourself that you deserve it. And if you can do that, if you can hold that, it's a skill. It takes years to learn it. Still don't have it. But if you can slowly learn that and have it from a young age, you're much more likely to be confident and have that validation rather than seeking it. So that was kind of what it was all about. And then I just started messaging people on Instagram and they blocked me. I'd messaged so many people and then they'd like unblock me and then I said loads more and then they blocked me again. It was just like, and the campaign went off on that day and it went, I couldn't
went viral.
Believe what happened, you know, before I'd even gone to sleep, people over in like Australia and New Zealand had started and like my day hadn't even, and it just, from there I was like, oops.
Amazing.
And it just went without me. And that's kind of what I loved, is that the community took it as theirs. It didn't belong to me.
Did men in rugby take it on as well? Did you have male allies in that?
It had commentary. That was kind of where the documentary came from, is that it really empowered female athletes, that campaign and that hashtag. And you could see how we all felt the same. It kind of brought everyone together a little bit and was like, okay, look, we are one community. We're not one against the other or all separated. Like if we need to, kind of like, we know we have a call to arms now.
Yeah,
we can do this together.
And ultimately this is all for the love of a sport that we all share. Like we all want it to go well and to be elevated and to...
Definitely. And that's what it felt like to me anyway. It felt like we'd suddenly all realized that this women's rugby community wasn't that separated, and if we needed each other, we could cool rally cry, and we would all come, and that's what it sort of felt like. So that was fantastic, but it's still an echo chamber, right? You're still talking to people who already believe you, which is great. We're now together, but we're not making actual change, because the people who predominantly control the change are the people who aren't us. They're predominantly men in positions of power, controlling funding, who do not understand our lived experiences because they've never had them. And I was like, okay, step one, great. Step two, actual change, like real change. And how do you do that? So I've kind of fumbled this idea for a couple of months. I was staring at a blank TV. I'm going, well, if it was there, and like my dad,
the biggest platform,
or someone else's dad saw it, or someone's granddad saw it and thought, okay, maybe I understand a little better. Would that make the change that we're really looking for? Could it turn the dial just like 1%? So tomorrow, the decision you make is better than the one you made yesterday. That was it. That was all. If I can make one small change to one person, that will create change over time. So I was like, okay, well, I'll do that then. And off I went. I can't really.
But so Vic, what was your background? I mean, what was aside from playing rugby, but you didn't do that professionally, is that right? What were you? I mean, what's your career?
Yes, I totally did it professionally. No, so I put I played rugby as a hobby. I found it as a female sport when I was 19 at university. I didn't even know women played before that point, which is so weird to say. But I'd never seen women play, never. But my background work-wise is like marketing. So I've done some video production, but I'd never made a film. Like this was totally out of my. I've watched loads. Total expert at watching films. Not an expert in any way of making them. I have a little bit of like theatre background too. I used to work in theatres and do a lot of drama when I was a kid, so I understood storytelling, and I guess in that respect, and all of these different pieces of my life sort of fed into this: rugby, marketing, a little bit of storytelling, so theatre. They kind of all came into this somehow one moment where I was like, oh, I'm going to make a film, just going to do it. If it ends up on YouTube, great. If I TV aired it once, and absolute winner. And then kind of skip to the end. Amazon picked it up. I was like, what is happening in my life? And it kind of, it just.
I mean, that is absolutely no mean feat. And I say that from a point of view of knowing how hard it is to get anyone to listen to a potential idea for a documentary, because I'm trying to have something picked up and created from the row that I did across the Pacific. And we've got footage, we've got we filmed, we've done loads of stuff in preparation for that, and it's just the kind of feedback that you get very often is, well, I don't know, it just sort of sounds a bit familiar. Did anyone get eaten by a shark? And this sort of
did anyone get eaten?
I mean, that's been some of the feedback that we've had, unless something like completely crazy happened that would give it the relevant drama. I mean, I find it actually insulting to the intelligence of their audience that broadcasters kind of think like that. And actually, certainly for our story, the drama is far more psychological, just to leave that on a cliffhanger. But I mean, my point is, I know how hard that is. It's not as easy as you're perhaps suggesting it is, that you come up with an idea in lockdown, you're like looking at your TV and you just create this idea, and then suddenly Amazon Prime are knocking at your door.
Well, I mean, obviously it wasn't quite that linear, but because I had a full-time job at the time as well, it was just sort of something I was doing. And I am the type of person that has to be busy, because I'm kind of like, I cause trouble when I'm bored. I'm just that person, at school when your teacher's like, I was like, I'm bored, so I just want to, I don't know, I just want to do something, so I'm just gonna fall over, I'm gonna tip the table over. The brain's always firing, so I needed an extra thing. And a bit deeper than that, I'm not quite that simple, but a bit deeper than that is I actually believe we all need more than one thing going on in our lives. If all you do is work, and one day you have a really shit day at work, sorry, language, Well,
okay.
we're there
That's
now.
all right.
Apologies, everybody. Sorry,
We can
Mark.
swear. It's fine.
Is that if you have a bad day at work, that's 100% of your day.
Mm.
And when actually, if you have a hobby, whether it's a run club or making films or a podcast, whatever it may be, if you have something that you really enjoy too, then that work only becomes 50% of what feels like your whole
it dilutes the impact.
And you can go, do you know what?
Perspective.
That was rubbish today, but at 5 o'clock I clock off.
Yeah.
And I can go and look at the other thing that I really want to do and kind of bring yourself out of it a little bit. And I do fully believe that we talk about this like hustle culture and side hustles and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, if you want to do that, fine. But I think it should be looked at from the perspective that you need to have other things to do with your time. And that doesn't mean be as busy as anyone or everyone says. It just means have other things in your life to do, to take away from some of the pain and some of the heartache you can get from these things. So
and the monotony and
exactly.
The loss of perspective, and
something really goes to shit, like you do lose your job, you still have something. Something that your mind can see positivity from, and that positivity breeds positivity. But if you only have 100% negative, you're going to really struggle to bring yourself out of that. I think it's an understated kind of approach to life, and it has been renamed into things like hustle culture and side hustles and all that kind of stuff. And it's not about being busy for busy's sake. It's about having something else in your life you really care about that can't be impacted by all these things. So that was sort of a piece of it. I had a job. I was fundamentally busy all of the time, but I wanted to do something I really cared about. And in lockdown, we certainly weren't playing rugby. So this kind of gave me that bit of that back.
Well, and I mean, even more than that, I was aware of it because, I was training at Richmond Rugby Ground myself, and I was acutely aware that as lockdown eased, the male players were allowed back in the gym. The female players were not. They were given absolutely no time.
And that was a big bone of contention, that you're paying your fees to be part of a club, but the men are prioritizing facilities when they're deemed to play at in a higher league. Well, technically both the men's and the women's played in their respective championship, so the second tier of their sport, but the men's was still considered higher, and therefore the men deserve. And
there's obviously no regard for equality there, but there's also no regard for mental health and the women needing access to their to physical stimulus as much as men.
The women's section themselves were fantastic. The coaches made sure that there was at least a weekly contact point around rugby, so whether it was going through game plans to learn before we were back on the pitch, or they put in some sort of like challenges so everyone could do it at home and be part of exercise together without being together. And what they did among themselves was fantastic. But it is always a reminder that just so you know, you're not quite good enough for us yet.
Not quite as important.
Yeah, you're important, but only a little bit important. And I think that kind of resonates across.
But testament to the concept for your documentary, you had some really big hitters involved, didn't you? I mean,
yeah, it was great.
You had some big names in there, and actually you did have some male advocates. I know Ugo Monja was part of that documentary, and you got Sue Anstis involved as well, and
yeah, she's fab. And that I had to have people that could, from Sue's perspective, explain the wider picture. It was really easy to end up getting really wrapped into rugby, and actually someone could step back and say, look, well, here's the picture from football's perspective and women's sports perspective, and this is where it's going, to give you some understanding. To sort of almost remove that echo chamber, and rightly so, having a man involved in it hopefully gave men somebody to resonate with, because eventually it would have just otherwise become women talking at you about their problems, which is what I think one of the big problems is men. The word equality, for me, I believe when you start to talk about equality with men, they immediately have to go into defensive mode. I'm not surprised. I would too if I was there. But the point of this wasn't that it was a blame approach. No one's to blame as such anymore. I just think we need to get past that. Yes, all of these things are a fault of somebody somewhere at some stage, but we've got to let that go and look forwards. The whole purpose of the film was to remove blame, discuss lived experiences that you may or may not know of, and then look forwards. And that was it, really. And Steph was definitely one of the best parts about her telling her story, and a real raw story, was that it resonated with anybody. Being bullied,
it was really powerful,
isn't a gendered experience.
No.
That, I think, broke that barrier between it being, this is all about women in rugby. It's not. This is just about human beings looking for a place to feel comfortable, to do something they love, and to be accepted for it. And once you removed gender from the topic, so many men were messaging me when it came out and just saying, look, I really get it. Like, I remember finding rugby, or I'm a big lad and I love rugby because it gave me a home, and I see how these women feel now. And it suddenly became this thing that it was no longer a man versus woman experience. It was just a person trying to find a place to exist in the world. And that was probably the best part.
I mean, one of the things that I'm just realizing now, hearing you talk about it and actually truly understanding how it came about, is, you know, I watched that and I just think how delicately you handled that whole subject, and brilliantly. You know, it just strikes me that as someone with no previous film directing experience, like, you've just had the courage to just walk into that world and say, I believe in this idea and this cause, and I might be terrified, but fuck it, I'm going to do it anyway. And then here you are with a documentary on your hands that is available on Amazon Prime, that, you know, has been up for various awards, that you've done a huge promotional tour around the UK with. I mean, it just goes to show, and I guess that you for me, you just epitomize what it is to be intrepid and there are so many different ways in which we can, you know, be fearless and you know, resolute and courageous, but to go into a space where you have no previous experience, where I'm very sure you probably felt like a total imposter at times, didn't really know what you were doing, made it up as you went along, but you did it anyway, and it was a tremendous success. So, I mean, just congratulations. It's so incredible. But do you feel like you've discovered something about yourself? You must have. Like, you've now opened up a skill that you didn't really even know you had. Like, now
but first and foremost, I definitely realized that this is something I should be doing for the rest of my life without a shadow of a doubt. Like, that's guaranteed. But I also discovered that my toxic trait is, when someone tells me I can't do something, I must do it. like
I am exactly the same.
I saw when my we started, I'd spoken to a couple of production companies that just said, look, I just don't think it's financially
you just
viable.
can't know.
I'm just not sure.
You just haven't got any experience, Victoria.
And unfortunately, and it always seems to pan out this way, it was men in both companies that said it to me, and I just went, oh no, you've just unlocked that box.
What have you done?
Fine. You think I can't do it? Watch me.
Amazing.
It's like,
amazing.
It definitely is my toxic trait, but has served me well. So I can't, I won't be changing it anytime soon.
Thank God for that.
Yeah, I think I've done it all my life, even with some really small, unnecessary things. I'm like, right, since
just
you
get really belligerent about
it. No, I can't do this. I will.
Yeah.
But it I guess at the time as well, women's sports docs weren't a thing. Not really. There's a handful of them out there, and not many of them were on large streaming platforms. Like Cheer is a good example. But for me, although cheerleading, hard, right? 100% agree. What do those people eat? It perpetuates part of the problem, because I feel that
around image,
it's a very tough sport, and I'm never going to take that away from any cheerleader. It's a female dominated space that, for me, continues to put women in a very specific box.
And very aesthetic and very image led.
Feeds into that wider problem. So it doesn't actually help make any change in any way. It actually tells more women that they should stay in that box and stay in that specific physique, and stay in their female lanes. So yeah, I think at the time it was one of very few you could probably find on a platform that did the advocacy piece. And yeah, that kind of was what it was.
And what do you know to be the sort of impact of that? I mean, I just, from a sort of fairly outside perspective, you know, you then watch the Lionesses at the Euros only, you know, what, maybe 6 months later, and suddenly there's just this tsunami of support and, you know, women and families going to football matches, which is like pretty unheard of at men's football matches.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's just a different crowd and it's a different vibe. And, you know, I remember watching the fight. I'm really not into football at all. I was crying. It was so incredible.
What you mean is you're not into men's football?
Yeah. Yes, I should
I seriously mean that.
Yeah,
I used to hate football, but what I realized is that I just hate men's football. I don't have anything against men. Like you would probably say that I do. I really, really don't. But I just don't like men's football. I find it horrendous to watch, but I really enjoyed. I went to the opener of the Euros at Old Trafford, and it was amazing. You know, there were loads of kids there. There were loads of women there. People weren't really drinking. Everyone was having a great time. I had loads of friends watching it from home that said you could hear the different tone of the crowd.
Yeah.
Because women's sport has a very different audience to men's sport. It's predominantly 50-50 male, female for a start.
Yeah.
It has a crossover of those who watch men's sport, but it's not 100% those who watch men's sports. Even just from a business perspective, it unlocks a whole audience that you've never tapped into before. How is that seen as a risky market? You're now able to reach more people, more women, and predominantly women still control household spend. So realistically, you want the women because they're gonna spend more money on your product. But for such a long time, women's sport's been seen as, oh well, you know, it's just women playing sport, they shouldn't be doing that anyway, and that's just not the case. So yeah, the Lionesses was fantastic. I remember watching the finals on holiday with some friends, and we'd all like stopped the holiday, gone into the living room, had everybody set up, drink some food and everything, screaming. The whole room was screaming, from the kids, the men and the women. And that for me was the difference. I think if it had been the men's football, we wouldn't have had the same interest and involvement from all of the women in the room. I certainly probably wouldn't have watched it as wholeheartedly as I did. God, we were just the joy that came out.
I mean, I had tears pouring down my face.
Yeah,
it was so moving, but it meant so much. I think it probably just meant so much to women, well, hopefully, and men as well, but for so many different reasons. I mean, I just wasn't exposed to women playing sport when I was a child.
No,
you know, it took me until I was in my 30s to even become active and think that it was a world that I could be in and enjoy and thrive in and achieve in. So, you know, it was powerful for so many reasons. I mean, what do you see now as being kind of the key drivers for change from where we're at now, which is I think we are in a different place, aren't we, to perhaps where we were like a year ago, 18 months ago even. But almost on an individual level. So to people kind of listening to this, I'm very sure that we're not going to have the chairman of the FA listening to the podcast, which is a shame, but you never know. Never know.
If you are listening or watching, please let us know. I've got a great idea for a film for you.
But for individuals, men and women, you know, young, old, any age, in terms of, you know, just harnessing a bit of what you've displayed there with your belief in a cause, to just go out there, to make it happen, to believe, you know, in your values and in your capabilities. What would you say to encourage other people to kind of do that for the greater good, for the greater benefit of everybody?
I guess is to understand why it's important to you, because we can say go be better for everybody else, but nobody wants to do that, do they? They actually just want to be better for themselves. It pains me to say that it takes a lot of men to have daughters for them to start advocating, because they suddenly realize, they suddenly open their eyes to it. And you can wait till you have a daughter if you really want to. I'm not necessarily against that. A lot of people are. But actually, I think, do you want to live in a world where your mother, wife, sister, best friend, daughter doesn't have the same opportunities you do? Do you really want to live in that world? And I would hope.
Does it make you feel better about yourself?
Yeah. And if the answer is yes, then don't have children.
Yeah.
Don't create more of that. Well, I know this is horrendous. I can't believe I'm saying it out loud. Don't bother. Don't make this any worse for everybody else. But if you really do just want to live in a world where actually you look at your friends and your family and you go, can you believe it if you didn't have that opportunity yourself? That's why you're doing it. And actually there is something, I think, for everybody. My perception at the moment is that everybody sees the opportunities as like a pie and everybody's got a piece of the pie. But if you give another piece to someone else, then you have less. But it's not really like that. The more you give to other people, the bigger the pie gets.
The bigger the pie gets,
it's not my seat for your seat sort of approach. But I can understand how you think that if you're in like broadcasting, for example, and they suddenly stop picking you and as a guy and start putting a woman in, oh well, they because she's a woman. Well, what happens if she's actually better than you? And you've just never considered it in that way. There are people who are better at us than our jobs, and none of us like to admit it, but it's usually true. So look at it from that perspective. It's about everybody being at the table, not just there's only 5 seats and you're holding on to yours as long as possible. I think that's a really long-winded answer to your question.
No, and I'm going to pick up on what you said about the men not waiting until they have daughters to want to affect change, and I'm inclined to agree with that. However, I was very acutely aware of the power of that and the potential for that when we were about to go and do our row. I can't tell you how many messages of support we got, overwhelmingly from men with young daughters. It was so strange, just reaching out and saying, good luck with what you're about to do, and I'm going to be monitoring you closely, and with my daughters are 5 and 7 or however old they are, and we're going to watch you together. And it just really struck me. It wasn't really women reaching out to us and saying these things. It was men who obviously had the vision that their daughters should be able to achieve anything they wanted in life, but were clearly conscious of the fact that that doesn't currently exist, and that maybe this was like a doorway into that way of thinking. So I think it's out there. It's sort of latent, isn't it? And it's just a question of kind of gathering enough pace and getting enough people behind it, and men as much as women, right? Not one versus the other, but
exactly, not one versus the other. Sport is sport, right? It's something more for you to watch.
Well, life is life as well. It's not even necessarily about sport, is it? It's just about everybody having the same opportunities to
I use the
thrive.
Nations as a really good example. Now that they've split them, men's then women's, instead of having to watch like 15 games of rugby in a weekend, which even for me, I'm a bit like I've got other things. I can't just watch rugby all day, although I would. I'd also be really drunk by the end, which equally is useless for things I need to do. Now, instead of like 2 months of just unnecessary amounts of rugby, I now have 4 months of the perfect amount.
Yeah.
So all it does for me is give me more to watch over a longer period of time. So I absolutely got into fantasy rugby during the first lockdown because there was no real other way to engage with the sport. And my partner at the time, he did it with all his mates. So I was like, oh, God, then I'll get involved. And it turned out I was accidentally, because I only knew the England team and I knew nothing really about forwards. Because I'm a back myself. So I was just like, whatever, you do that thing at the front, pushy, give me the ball. Any rugby fan any forward is going to hate me. I've said that. And I got really into it, and it really connected me with the sport even more. Then they rolled it out for the women's tournament a couple of months later, and I was absolutely all over it. My Friday afternoons are spent solidly researching everything about every team involved. I know more about the oppositions now. It's not just like my own team. I think it was absolutely fab. Now, and I get to do that for 4 months now instead of some intensive 6-week tournament where you just blow your brains out with sport. But why not want that? Now you've got twice as much international sport to watch. And for me, especially watching England play, the caliber is fantastic, and it's only getting better. So
what's next, Vic? What's the next? Have you got another documentary in the pipeline? What are your plans?
To be seen.
All very much under wraps.
As soon as I can say something, I will.
Okay, well, you can tell me off the record.
Yeah, you can ply me with wine. A couple of weeks.
What would you say is your sort of sketchiest moment in life so far? Do you feel, I mean, and not necessarily physically or in adventure, it could be mentally, it could be emotionally. When have you really taken yourself to the edge, do you think? Or have you?
Definitely. There's probably a few points. I think more emotionally and mentally than anything. I haven't, by no stretch of things you've done, tested myself physically in that respect. But as you can probably tell, I'm quite like, I want to say highly strung, because I'm probably not. I'm far too like blasé. But I do push myself too much, as you know, probably I've described. I'm like, yeah, this kind of film thing happened. Actually, it's far more than that. I just kind of like play it down a great deal. So I have exceedingly high expectations of myself. I don't have high expectations of anyone else. I believe if I was to put my expectations of myself on anyone else, I would be an awful person. But I have them of myself. I just do. And that can really push me. Sometimes a little bit too far. I have been diagnosed with depression in the past. I've had to work really hard to own that and be able to survive that. The first time round was horrendous. It took me a couple of years to really be fully functional again.
Right.
I had a bout recently where there was 3 or 4 months of really quite questionable mental space, but because I'd done it before, I was able to put better systems in place to kind of cope with it and say, look.
And what are those systems? Do you mind talking about that, or any strategies or tools that you use to navigate through that?
The first thing was sort of acceptance of that being where I was, and
that it's a normal human response, that
100%.
We're all fallible, we're all vulnerable.
Not everything's perfect all the time. And actually it was when you're ready, because you're never just ready the next day to go, okay, well, I'll fight my way out of this. Sometimes you kind of just got to let it be. And some days you just got to stay in bed all day. If you cannot get out of bed, some days you got to let the feelings happen. Otherwise you're bottling them up. Sometimes you just got to let it be for a little while. Give yourself the time to know where you're at, what's caused it, what's happened. And then when you're ready, at some point you're going to have to push yourself to be ready. But when you're ready to go, right, I'm done with this. I don't really want to feel like this anymore. In fact, I never want to feel like this again, but we'll start with now.
But I might. And that also that's something else to accept.
Yeah, I start doing loads of things. So the first few things to do was start exercising more. Whether that's walking or going to the gym or whatever it may be. And on the days I really didn't go, I just went anyway. Even if I just rolled around on the mat and stretched, I was like, I'm still here. This is still beneficial to my mind.
I'm showing up.
Yeah, exactly. I put the leggings on and I rolled around the gym floor. It's a step in the right direction. And little things that I could do. Reducing alcohol intake immediately is one of the first things I try to do, because I'm very aware that I definitely drink more than the recommended amount by far. I just do. I play rugby, for God's sake, of course I do. And so I'm really careful around those things. And then start getting back into like journaling. And on the night, so I journal quickly in the morning, really simple, sort of check in how I'm feeling, things I want to do with the day, and gratitude, just to kind of lift myself up, but make it really quick. Like, it's not supposed to be some, I don't know, if someone else read it, some like game-changing thoughts that I'm having. My thoughts aren't game-changing. It's just like how you feel and what's going on in your mind. Get it off of your mind. And at night I try to do it a little bit more too. And some of those are the kind of slightly deeper things, like, how do I really feel about myself today, or what's happened, or that situation I did or didn't cope very well with. It doesn't have to be judgmental. It just has to be
A
off.
recognition.
Yeah, just get it
Yeah.
out, so you don't have to think about it. And then on the days you really don't want to write it down, are the days you really have to write it down.
Yeah.
So those are sort of like the basic structures that I then built on. But it took me like,
and patience,
sounds
giving
really
yourself
easy,
time, and
it's
being kind to yourself.
I've been doing on and off for years, and when I'm feeling great, it's really easy, and when I'm feeling shit, it's really hard. And it's not this, you're going to do it every single day and you're going to show up every single day, but at least you're trying. You know, the purpose is trying. And that sort of then gave me a bit more positivity to say, oh, well, I did go to the gym today, or I did journal today, or I did get out for and walk the dog, or whatever. Well, now I've done these things, I can do a little bit more. And that positivity that breeds positivity. Action breeds action. You know, exercise creates energy somehow. Don't know how.
Building blocks.
Exactly. And kind of go from there. So that's sort of what I do now, because I know that if I don't, I'll end up far worse in the long run, which is what happened last time. So it's just a case.
But I think from my own point of view, I always find it useful to look back and recognize how far I've come. So it's like you say, you know, inevitably we're all going to face pressure in life to some degree or other, and we'll all deal with it differently, of course. But you know, to know that you've got through something that was probably worse and you're still here, you're still forging on, gives you, I think, often the strength to navigate your way through the next thing that comes up, and the next thing and the next thing. And they're just, you know, we're just constantly building new edges, aren't we, to our armory and to our capabilities.
But sometimes it's just age, isn't it? Until you've done it once, you're not going to know how to do it the next time. And I the first time around wouldn't recognize any of the symptoms. Like looking back, I recently did a mental health first aid course, as I'm a trustee of a charity called Brave Mind, and all of the trustees did the course to be mental health first aiders. And there is the second day was really deep diving into depression, and I openly admitted to everybody I cried the whole way through that session, because it talks about all the feelings that people with clear signs of depression have, and it's ripped out of me everything I hadn't realized at the time I'd first had it. And I was looking and going, well, I literally could tick every single one of these boxes, all of them, and then listening to other people who maybe have never felt this, going, oh, really is that? And I was thinking and going,
and the talking about it, because so often in life
every box on this list and had no idea that actually equaled depression. I was just like, and it wasn't bad crying, I just couldn't believe, I just pulled the emotion out of me immediately. My whole body was just like
a shock realization.
But
it you know, it's like talking about these things, you know, we whenever we encounter difficulty in our lives, I think we always default to, I'm the only person going through this situation, not in a sort of self-indulgent, you know, miserable way, but just you feel like I'm alone in this. But actually, the more we talk about these things, you know, and bust all the pointless taboos, you know, I found the same thing myself going through divorce. You know, so you think, oh, I'm the only, you know, 40-year-old going through divorce. It's absolute rubbish. You suddenly start talking about it, and you discover that there are a whole load of people in your network who are going through a similar thing or have been, and now they're ready with advice and wanting to support you. So communication is so essential, I think. What would you say is do you have like a personal motto in life? Something that guides you?
I do. It is each day is a gift, not a given right. And I actually have it tattooed to my hip. Not many people can't really see it. And that's why I had it there, because it's for me, not for other people. And it was when I was at uni, I was definitely struggling a little bit to focus. I have had some trauma in my childhood, and I wasn't maybe balancing or managing that very well. So when I was really young, my brother passed away when he was a baby and I was 7. And it kind of built a lot of these probably not very good coping mechanisms that I then kind of came to lean on. And when I was at uni, I was really drinking heavily. and not focusing and not doing all the things that I wanted to do, because it just was kind of self-medicating. And I turned to myself one day. I was like, if you don't get a grip on this, you will never do the things you want to do. You will never be the person you know you can be. He didn't get these days, and you get them. And that's
really
really
powerful.
what all it came down to. And it can maybe be framed as a lot of pressure, but really it wasn't. It was just a bit of a wake-up call, like, just remember, you know,
the whole I get to do this rather than I have to do
and
this.
then I have to do this,
just changing the attitude.
Exactly that. So to myself, it was just a reminder that this isn't, it can, and don't get me wrong, you can still have fun and enjoy your life. It's not something like overly buckle down forever kind of thing, but just, you know, just take it a bit carefully, and do the things you want to do with your time, rather than just screwing around.
Oh my God, I'm so here for that.
That really was what it was all about. I sort of forget it's there, you know. I just blends into things. It's only when you go on holiday, go swimming things. I'm like, my friend, you have that, and I'm like, yeah, me too. And I
it's just part of you, part of your body, part of your psyche. Exactly. I love it. We should all have our personal mottos tattooed on us, I think.
Yeah, exactly. If I had to pick a personal motto, that's probably the one that I would always, I have to now, right? I'll always live by.
Love it. Well, are there a couple of moments in your life that if you could go back to them, say in the next 24 hours, you would in a heartbeat? And second part to that question, would you change those moments in any way?
Wouldn't change anything, because I don't believe in regret. There's no point in looking back and going, you know, if I could change things, if I could go back and change all sorts of stuff, you know, I'd change the fundamental things, like my brother still being here. And I can't do that. So you can't live in that. For me, I can't live in that space. And
totally agree.
If I changed it, maybe I wouldn't be where I am now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think if I could choose to go back to anything, it would be all the fun bits, just to go back and do them again, because they had so much fun the first time. And go and relive some moments with friends and some parties and some good times and some just happy experiences. If I could go back and do anything, that's.
And the moment that Amazon Prime knocked on your door.
Well, at the moment I had knocking on theirs. I think
we've heard about this documentary.
Heard about it. I knocked on their door for months. No, I think they just said yes to get rid of me. Like those little things, the little celebratory moments where my friends have had some incredible thing. Like one of my friends the other day, she the first female player to get 100 caps for Harlequins. She's one of my best friends, and I absolutely love that for her. And so if I could go back and, you know, friends' birthday party, wins with them.
There's so much joy in celebrating other people, isn't there?
What is it with people not doing that, right?
I know.
My friend's got a new job, I sent her a bunch of flowers. She's like, no one's ever done that. I was like, what?
Oh
no! If your mates do something great, tell them it's great. Send them something. Send them a card. It doesn't matter, you know. Just celebrate each other's wins, because when you get a win, you want them to celebrate it with you too. So,
well, I mean, that's what you're all about. We have that in common for sure. Like, you know, that's your purpose, is to create a better world and of opportunities for everyone in sport and outside of sport. And, you know, my driver, little plug for We Are Intrepid, but that has come about from the keynote talks that I deliver. And then people come up to me afterwards and realize that I'm not just this world record winning, you know, born athlete. I came into sport and exercise very late in my life, and, you know, I've just had some extraordinary experiences. And then they're like, well, how could I get a taste of that? I want to give that to people and, you know, show them what their capabilities are. I derive so much joy from seeing that same kind of realization or breakthrough in people's faces, their eyes just lighting up when they realize, actually, that I did do that.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same as, you know, celebrating your friend's joy, and it doesn't take away from yours.
No,
it adds to it.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Just go and enjoy other people's wins, and it makes you happy and gives you more drive and feeds into that positivity for you. Like, I absolutely love celebrating my mates. I think they're all fab. As I said earlier, I've hand chosen them to be my friends, whether they want to be or not. I just kept bugging them until they liked me. Such a strange person. And I just love that for them. One of my friends set up an agency in lockdown, And now it's worth over £1 million, and she's got her
incredible
15th employee, and like that's insane growth. And I love celebrating that.
I love seeing people take a risk though, more than anything.
She quit a job, started a business, and got divorced.
Amazing.
One. I was like,
amazing. Good girl.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. What would you say are your worst habits?
My toxic trait earlier.
I
can't do things. I'm like, yes, I can. Being way too busy.
Right.
Way too busy. Like when people ask me what I do, I can't really answer that question because whatever comes to mind is what I do.
But I get the feeling you wouldn't change either of those things.
Nah. I feel to be bored. Some days I would love to do less than I do, just because my mind is constant. And I don't know if this is true, but I saw an internet stat, love them, that not everybody has like a continual internal monologue.
Right.
And I can't believe that's true because I'm 100% of the
always
time,
on.
Always. There's always, and like my family, I go to sleep with them like my iPad on, watching some kind of trash television because it's the only thing I can find that dials out, that drowns out the noise in my head so I can go to sleep. Otherwise I just lie there for hours.
I think the world needs a wonderful mix of all kinds of people. We need people like you. We need people who can also find stillness and calmness.
They're the people that can fall asleep.
I wish I was that kind of person.
That's what I think. It's the people that can fall asleep at the drop of a hat are the people that do.
That's me.
That's me. Fine then.
I can sleep anywhere.
Monologues. I'm like, how is your brain not thinking right now?
Well, usually because I'm so tired and I've just
from all the things that you're doing
physically so hard. Yeah, exactly. What's the best compliment that you've received recently?
Good question. Don't take compliments very well, so don't tend to store them.
There has to be something.
The truthful answer. What you said earlier, that creating the documentary is a really phenomenal achievement, and I do get that a lot. I think I brush it off a lot.
Taking compliments is hard. That's why I put that question in, because it makes people, it's far easier to think of what your bad habits are than what's the best compliment you've received. Which is not even something you've said to yourself. It's something that somebody else has said to you, right? So it should be quite easy to just kind of regurgitate that. But it's funny how many people find that a really tough question. Yeah. My last question, Vic, is something I ask every person that comes on the podcast. What do you wish that I'd asked you? Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had? No, I don't think so. You haven't asked me to go for wine with you yet. We've been here for at least an hour. Okay, let's go. Now it's 12 o'clock on a Friday. It's definitely wine o'clock. It's wine time. Because I think like we've had so many conversations that we were always gonna have these chats. So no, I don't think so. Right, let's have that wine then. Done. And talk about documentaries. Oh, thank you so much. Honestly, I'm so grateful for your time. I'm so glad that we could make this happen. And good luck with your move. And I will see you for wine really soon. See you soon. And if people haven't yet seen No Woman, No Try, they can find it on Amazon Prime. We've name checked that a good few times. They can also follow you where? On the social medias. My handle's the same everywhere, Victoria H Rush, so you can't miss it. Okay, go follow people. Thank you so much, Victoria. That's been amazing. Thanks. The Pin Drop podcast brings you the most intrepid chat on the podsphere. Interesting people sharing their personal formula for success, stories of personal growth, people confessing their fears and what they have learned from going to the edge. Hosted by me, Vicky Anstey, founder of We Are Intrepid.